a song for you.
You're listening to Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast. I will do one episode for each song the band recorded in the studio. However, this is a fan podcast and not band endorsed. It's more of a tribute to their long history, well beyond just the hits, and my way of giving something back to a band that has given so much to me. Let's dig in! Hello and welcome to another episode of Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast. I am your host, Scott Haskin, here with our final album track from this season covering In Rock, or Deep Purple in Rock, however you know it. And we're talking, of course, about the track Hard Lovin' Man. Kind of teased it in the last episode about my feelings that this might be one of the greatest hard rock songs ever recorded. I remember hearing an interview with Roger Glover, and I believe he said that this was done in one take. Now, I would imagine it's certainly fair to say that there were potentially some overdubs, and that's fine. It's studio recording, not live performance, so that's okay. But yeah, I love this track. Not a lot of lyrics, but it is a quite a heavy song. Got a lot of stuff going on into it, and we're going to get into every little bit of it. But first, you know I have to read the extensive well of liner notes. This will be the last track I'll do that for, since it's the last track on the actual album. The bonus tracks don't have any mention in the album at all, at least not in my copy. We're talking about Hard Lovin' Man. It says, Hard Lovin' Man for Martin Birch, Catalyst. And that's all we get. So let's get right into the song. Track number 7, the final track on side 2 from In Rock. Here it is, Hard Lovin' Man. So the great thing about this introduction is, as this is the last track on the album, and it comes in at 7 minutes and 10 seconds, according to my MP3 from the 25th anniversary reissue. The thing is, that you're going to get an explosive song. I mean, they really set it up to be exciting and just big. And you've heard enough on this album to know that this is going to be something. And so I love that. And then I like how it just, like, the music just kind of drops out and they let Roger lead it in. We're about to get a little bit of what's called a gallop on the guitar. But just listening to Roger's bass isolated like that, it's beautiful. I love the way it sounds. You definitely hear the pick. And, if he was playing with his finger style, you wouldn't get quite that harsh attack on every note. It would be a little bit smoother. But I like that. For rock, it's not bad to have a pick. I remember, who was it? I think it was Paul Newton from Uriah Heep telling me that he was a finger bass player. But when it came to the way that Uriah Heep wanted to sound, they said he needed to play with a pick to get that hard edge. And it's certainly true. I've experimented with my own bass guitar and certainly found that to be the case. The pick, it does strike the string harder, so you get a harsher sound. Makes perfect sense if you just consider some basic physics. Right back into the chaos. We had Roger Glover kind of just like walked us gently over the stream, and then we're like right back in it. And I love it. I love the guitar riff to this. Again, it's not about being technically difficult. It's about just being enjoyable. And this little dun 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 dun, that sort of gallop feel to it will carry well through the song. But also the insanity that we're hearing behind it with what John Lord is doing really is just fascinating. It just sounds like he's firing up every possible sound he has and playing them all at the same time. And then now we're going to get more into the Hammond organ. One thing with the organ that I noticed is that we're getting a very, very fast vibrato. I mean, those aren't just straight smooth notes. And that definitely adds to the grittiness on top of the distortion that he's running it through, makes just for a killer organ sound. And I think it just adds another level of power to this song. That with the thickness of Roger's bass, the just crunchiness of Richie's guitar, what a great combination on top of Ian Pace playing really heavy snare sound too. One thing that I think is really interesting about this is the way that the vocals sit on top of that verse. They really sound quite perfect as far as the balance goes, but it's got a lot to do with really what's going on musically. That there's kind of room for it right now. We don't have anything too big or thick underneath of it. That's the vocal is resting in. Really feels like more like we're resting on top of the music, which is really where you want to be. Really nice and clean. I don't think they've changed anything about the vocals. It's not louder. It doesn't have less effects on it. It's just, that combination of what's going on behind it. Obviously Ian Gillan in full force, really strong voice, sounds great. The band is, this is just such a perfect tempo for the song. Any faster, and it feels like a completely different song. Any slower, same thing. I mean, this is just absolutely the perfect tempo. This is a song that they've played live quite a bit, seen them perform it. And live, it's being a little bit faster works and makes sense. But I think for this version, for the clarity of it, to really be able to appreciate all the instruments, I think this tempo is absolutely perfect. I like that they're playing this part between the verse lines just really straight. I mean, John Lord is basically playing what I think he plays later on. I'll have to double check that to be sure. But there's no crazy solo in this interim between the words. And I really like that. I think that this song has plenty of aggression in it. So to lay back a little bit in the beginning, I think really makes the later parts more powerful. I think was a great decision was not drowning Ian Gillan's voice in reverb on this. And they've tended to do that a little bit on this album. They did a lot with Rod Evans. And I really like that the voice just sounds really natural, especially when he's hitting powerful notes like that, to have it blend more with the song instead of start to separate itself from the song with reverb, really makes a more powerful statement. And maybe the fact that they've done that earlier and not done it on the song makes it even more powerful when you get to this one, kind of like not playing solo between the verses. Really cool, though. Roger's bass sounds a little bit thicker on this one, the second verse here. And it's just really simple what he's playing. But this would go on to be like the staple of their live show when they're dragging on a song for 15, 20, 25 minutes, just that bada. And really important bass riff for them in this band. But absolutely killer. We're getting a little bit of crunch from John Lord on this one too. We're not getting the organ tones that we did between the verses. So really nice and thick. Just sounds fantastic. And what a push from this band overall. This really kind of illustrates the point that I was making with the vocals, because they have put a lot of reverb on the organ here, which is why it seems a little bit quieter, where the volume is not necessarily that it's lower in the mix. It's that it just is wider in the sound field, so it gives less definition to the sound. We can still hear everything he's playing, but with that reverb on there, it gives it just a different spatial quality, I guess. And it feels like it's set apart from the rest of the music. It should just be apart because it's a solo, the other instruments leaving, the room for it to kind of shine through, it being a little louder in the mix. But instead they've gone with the reverb trick, which was, very common back in the early 70s. So it does make a big difference as to how this sounds. It still sounds good, but if they didn't use as much reverb and just let the organ shine through, personally, I think it would have sounded better, but this sounds fine. And part of that, again, could just be the nostalgia factor. I'm so used to hearing it this way. But at the end of the day, what's most important is the playing, and you can hear what he's playing. And John plays some great parts during this. Then we get the break with the gong. For those of you who have yet to experience this song live, I won't say what happens. What I find really interesting about the way that they panned that, and for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, panning is where the sound sits in your ears. So normally, like when we're listening, you could hear the organ a little bit towards your right ear. That means it's panned a little bit more to the right. So, but what's interesting here is the way that they're panning this, the gong and the explosion of all of this, is that it goes so far to the left that it actually cuts out 100% in my right ear. And I find that fascinating because normally they would leave you a little bit of something so that you don't feel kind of out of sorts, but taking it all the way, even just for that split second, just is a little bit disorienting. Love this solo work from Richie. I especially love in the beginning where he doesn't go exactly to the right note. He kind of bends into each note. And that's a big difference. That effect just changes the way the whole thing feels. And it's subtle, but definitely there. And I've always enjoyed that. And then, of course, he goes on into the solo. Then they culminate in this, one of those, again, regrouping parts where they're all together again and they can move on to the next part. But his playing is just off the hook on this, absolutely off the hook. And yeah, always been a fan of it. And of course, the classic hanging high note coming out of the solo, going back into the riff again. I always like that. That's so common in rock music, especially. I've heard Richie do it a lot. I've heard some other guitarists do it as well. There's just something about the blending of it, because when a solo just kind of stops to reset for the riff, it always feels a little awkward to me. Almost like they cut and paste, or maybe were recording up to a certain point, stopped, and then started the recording up again and kind of punched the band in where they were supposed to be. Because it just separates it. But when you've got that hanging note, it really just connects the whole thing together. To be fair, you could still record them separately and just overdub that hanging note to make it sound like it was one continuous recording. You could do that. But for some reason, I don't know, whenever I hear that, I'm like, I just feel like the whole song was played live, which of course we know that it was. Now the organ is over in the left ear, and I find it interesting that at least in the mix I'm getting in the headphones I'm listening through, the rhythm guitar is much louder than the organ, and there should be a balance here, but for some reason this really works. And maybe part of it is because the gallop is the focus, that den da da den da da, just keeping us on that train track is the most important thing, and then the rest of it is just coloring in the sides. Very possible, but it certainly works. But I just find it interesting how they've switched it, and still the guitar is more powerful than the organ, which normally the melodic would take a little more precedence. Little bit of reverb at the very end of that vocal, and a slight pan heading off to the left, which is kind of interesting. It feels like the train has taken a turn, and we're changing directions, so the voice is then moving into a different position behind us. I don't know why I'm getting that as a visual, but it always, maybe it's like the gallop and the music's kind of about to turn a corner. I don't know. It could be a little bit more metaphorical than it really is or was meant to be. But there's really no reason for the vocal to trail off to one side like that, unless you're kind of indicating a directional change in the music. I love the trick of dropping the band out there and not doing it as just like a hard all of a sudden they stop playing, but to just like kind of fade them out into the distance and then have just Richie playing absolutely insanely on the guitar. And again, they go back to that panning, which I've always found a little bit fascinating, even going back to, before I knew anything about audio engineering, and was just really a casual listener of music and just a drummer. And I always thought, like, I wonder how they figured out what they wanted to do, or if somebody's like, okay, move it here, okay, move it there, and, just came out the way it did. I mean, I don't think necessarily that it could be as specifically planned as it might have just worked out that way. But I mean, somebody's hand was on the pan dial for sure, but I don't know if they went into recording that strategically saying, okay, right here, we're going to make you all the way to the left, right here, we're going to make you all to the right. So keep that in mind when you're playing. I think they just recorded it, and that was more of a post-production decision. By the end of this, it almost feels like Richie's walked all the way to the far end of a warehouse, and we've got the reverb from how far he is away from the microphone. I mean, obviously that's not the case, but it gives really that depth of sound with the reverb the way it is and the way it's been increasing. Again, lots of panning. And I think I get maybe the idea of it being, as Richie said, exciting and dramatic, in that the pan is not smooth. It's not, moving slowly to the left, then slowly to the right at the same speed. It's really just kind of all over the place. And I think that part was obviously by design, but the fact that it's going all the way to the left and then all the way to the right several times at different speeds, again, very disorienting. And I think that's the challenge of it for me, because if they would have gone 90% of the way instead of 100% of the way to one side or the other, I think I would like that part a little bit more, because it doesn't take away one ear completely. Whereas taking away one ear completely just kind of leaves me going, whoa, just hang on a second. It takes my focus out of the song, whereas it really shouldn't do that. My focus should be 100% on what's going on. So I think for me, just that extra push to the hard side, left or right, is a little much. But I like the idea of it for sure. I like the fact that it's not, just this smooth pan from one side to the other, that it's just kind of all over the place. I really like that. But overall, killer song, so much energy, so much chaos, so much just insanity, yet it's cohesive at the same time. You can follow the song, you can track it from beginning to end. There aren't, as crazy as it gets, there aren't parts where you're like, I have no idea what just happened. You feel the insanity of it, but yet it's still, clear enough to where you were able to hear pretty much everything. And I love that. It's such a fine line sometimes between throwing so much in there in the chaos that it's just muddy and indiscernible, and throwing enough in there to where it's interesting. And I think here we really get the best of all of it, because this performance is just, it's unhinged. That's really the only way I can describe the song, but definitely just the whole song just smacks you in the face. And I love it. Absolutely love it. I've listened to the song so many times, and this will be one where I'm like, okay, do I want to listen to something else, listen to the album again, or listen to this song again? And a lot of times I'll just put the needle back at the beginning of the keyboard solo and just listen to the whole thing through again from there before I flip it over or move on to, another selection of music. So this is definitely one that has been worn on my stereo many, many times, between my old stereo when I was a kid, the stereo I have now, MP3 players, iPods, iTunes, you name it. And just a killer track. And what a great way to end the album. And what a great way to end the show, guys. We'll be back in the next episode as we start hitting the bonus tracks, and tracks that were singles that were not included on the American version of the album, as well as just some tracks that weren't released as proper album tracks at all. And we'll have it all for you guys here on Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast. Have a great day. Cheers. Thanks for listening to Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast, a tour of the entire Deep Purple studio recordings. Please remember to give the show a rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. Leave a comment and tell your friends. I also have a Patreon set up if you'd like to support the show. You can also write to me at smokeonthepodcast@gmail.com. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and thanks for listening.